right, really quick, we'll get it out of the way. If you are Chiefs in here, just let me hear you say Chiefs. Okay, if you're San Francisco, I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. No, if you're San Francisco, let's hear a Niners. Oh, man, okay. Well, clearly, if you're Broncos, let's hear Broncos. I'm not gonna lie, it's really hard to root for the Chiefs as now a Bronco fan, right? I'm a newer Bronco fan. I came in Peyton Manning days. And so I'm a newer Bronco fan. It's hard to root for the Chiefs, but I do have a guy that I went to college with that is the punter for the Chiefs. So our family is full-on punter. We are full-on punters today, but we're full-on Chiefs today for him and his family. So, hey, can I tell you this? I'm really terrible at saying no. I really am. I am awful at it. I have deep issues with it. I'm just not really good at saying no to people. I'd love to tell myself, though, it's because I have this huge heart and I'm really compassionate and kind, but that's probably not the reason I say no. I don't say no. That's not the reason I say yes all the time. The reason I say yes is because I like to be involved, right? Anyone ever there? Anyone ever feel like if you say no, you'll miss out on something? Come on, let me see you show your hands. If you say no, you'll miss out, right? We got a couple. How about if you say no, you're afraid of conflict? Okay, maybe raise your hand here. Yeah, just a couple there. So a lot of times we don't say no for a lot of reasons. How many of you say, I would never raise my hand in public anyways, right? Okay, right. So I'm just really bad at saying no. A lot of times I feel like if I say no, I'm going to miss out on a number of things, whether that's spending time with people, whether that's learning a new trait or skill, whether that's being involved. I don't like saying no, and so I end up saying yes to a lot of things. Maybe I can advance myself somehow if I say yes to this opportunity, right? And don't look at me like you've never been there. Some of you just raised your hand, so I know you're in there with me, right? So here's the harsh truth, though, about saying yes to everything. It is way easier to say yes to something than it is to say no to something else. And it's so much easier to just say yes. Saying no is really, really hard. In fact, a lot of great leadership traits would say that you do have the ability and power to say no to the things that you need to say no to so that you can say yes to the things that you need to say yes to. And in saying yes and in thinking about saying no, this nature goes with everything that we've been taught as kids raised up, right? Deep down, we do all have a little bit of fear of conflict. Deep down, saying no, we think might create some conflict with one person or another, and so we just say yes. You were taught to say yes to your elders, yes to your parents, yes to your authority figures, your superiors, right? As kids, we kind of brainwash them. Because I said so is what we say, right? Why do I have to do this? Because I said so. And so we were taught from a very young age just to say yes. And so we get into a new job or a career, and our boss or our superior asks us to do something. And our boss or superior would never have our worst interest in mind. It's always our best interest, so I might as well just say yes, and this may advance me in some way or another. So they're for me, and so I'm just going to say yes to it. Or maybe some of us say yes to a lot of things because of acceptance. We just want to feel accepted somehow, to be liked, to fit in. So we say yes because we don't want to disappoint. Because again, if we disappoint, now that may bring up the conflict issue that we have. Here's a harsh reality though. When we simply say yes to anything because of fear or conflict or acceptance or whatever it is that you say yes to, that hurts deep down because it removes us from fully being who God created us to be. Sometimes we say yes for the wrong reasons, and that means that we're not fully ingrained with what it is and the purpose for which God has for us individually. You see, because if we say yes to everything, and if we are trying to be everything, then ultimately, the old adage is that we're nothing. If we are everything, then we're nothing at the end of the day. If we say yes to everything, then we can't stay in the lane that God designed us to stay in. Because did you know this? God made each and every one of you uniquely. When you look at a fingerprint, nobody has your fingerprint. Each of us are made uniquely with a specific purpose and mission that God has given us. Right, the book of Psalms is a very poetical type of book. It's a lot of poetry that's in there, and if you're familiar with any of it, you've probably heard this. You were knit perfectly in your mother's womb by God. Perfectly. Each and every one of us have this unique DNA and structure and fingerprint and design and mission that God has given every single one of us. He created you the way you are. And more importantly, He's gifted you in a way so that you can specifically do what He's called you to do, because guess what? No one else can do what He's called you specifically to do. No one. No one else can do what God has specifically called you to do. And so the very nature of Him giving you these gifts and these abilities that He's designed you to do, to be a leader, to say yes to, means that there are some things that you have to say no to some other opportunities. And you have to live the purpose and the mission that God has given you specifically. I've heard it said this way, you were born an original, so make sure you don't die a copy. If God uniquely created you in your mother's womb as an original, don't die a copy trying to do what everybody else is trying to do and be what everyone else is trying to be. And even better, the kind of coolest thing for me in all of this is that when followers of Jesus come together doing what God has uniquely gifted them to do, specifically for their design and their purpose or the way that God has wired us, it actually brings in diversity. Right? And so that's the coolest thing about followers of Jesus doing what God's called them to do, is it brings in diverse roles for what everybody is called to do. It's so much fun to see. He made us with certain gifts, and He made other people with other gifts, right? And it's in the diversity of those gifts and those people that the church comes together as one to fulfill the mission that God's given them to fulfill. It's the only way. It's the only way we come together is by using the diversity that is in amongst us. And then the tension that we see, right? There's tension that when we say yes to everything, when we're trying to become like everyone else, diversity then becomes uniformity. Because if we're all chasing after the same goals and trying to do those things, the diversity amongst us then just becomes uniformity. And we're pursuing the same goals. We're trying to have more. We're trying to do more. We all want more. And so today, we are wrapping up our limited series, where over the past couple of weeks, we have been talking about how the right limits in our life create an actual freedom, right? And so we've kind of suppressed the false notion that, hey, we have an unlimited amount of everything, right? We talked about focus, where maybe we could just be everywhere so that we can do all things. Or maybe we desire to have an unlimited amount of friends so that we can have all these people wrapped around our lives and go further faster, right? Or hey, we all know we've got an unlimited amount of time. I'll do that when I'm older. I'll do that when I get to this point in my life. We talked a little bit about how we want to have unlimited amount of resources, but what we've done is we've said that the right limits in all of those areas in our life actually create the freedom that we're looking for. And today's no different. We have gifts. Each one of us is uniquely wired in a specific way. And when we know that, own that, and embrace, or kind of limit ourselves in those gifts and characteristics and talents, we actually experience a greater freedom than just saying yes to everything because maybe it'll get me to where I'm trying to go. And what's amazing about all of this is that when we become limited in that aspect of our lives with our gifts and talents, that's when our diversity shines the most. And it's when our diversity shines the most that we're the most unified. And so today, what we're talking about is the unity that we have in diversity amongst the gifts that God's given each and every one of us. Turn with me, if you will. We're going to be in Romans chapter 12. That's on page 1006 of those black Bibles that are scattered throughout the room. As always, I say this every week, and I mean it wholeheartedly. If you don't own a copy of the Bible, that one is yours. Please take it. If you know someone that doesn't own a copy of the Bible, take that and give that to them. You can also follow along on the screens. We have a Journey Point app for those that don't know, Android and Apple. I don't know why we have Android, but Android and Apple. Right, there's a couple that got that. And so we have both of those. You can look at the Bible on there. You can read the Bible on there. That's also a place. Seth mentioned Connect cards. You can fill out Connect cards online. You can do all of that. You can watch messages. You can give. You can do all of those things on the app as well. but will be on there. If you are new to the Bible or you're still kind of here processing your thoughts about it, Romans is found in the New Testament portion of the Bible. New Testament is basically the back half of the Bible that deals with the life, the death, the resurrection and ministry of Jesus, and then the beginning of the church, right? And so we see those things all throughout the New Testament. Romans is what I would consider one of what I call the weightiest books of the Bible. It is very theologically deep. And what that means is theology just means the study of God. And so Paul, the writer of Romans, goes very deep in the very beginning of Romans into the study of God. And then what he does after that, though, is really unique. He then goes into, okay, we've studied God. What do I do about it? And I don't know about you. I love that because I'm a what do I do about it guy. And so I love the fact that he says, hey, here's all of this right here. But if you don't live it out, it doesn't matter if you know all of this, right? And so here's how you practically live it out. Paul, if you're new to the Bible, is a very prominent figure. Paul actually was a huge Jewish scholar, like one of the top, right? Trained amongst all of the best. And Paul comes, and actually, Paul didn't believe Jesus was who he said he was until he saw Jesus and believed Jesus was who he said he was, right? Paul, before that, actually had Christians persecuted and even murdered because of their belief in who Jesus was. But then, on a road to Damascus, was the area he was going, he's traveling, he sees Jesus. And then his life changed. And then Paul actually, as a matter of fact, we're talking about gifts and living the mission God's given us today. There's, I don't think, any greater picture of anyone in the Bible that says, hey, this is what Jesus has now called me to do, and I'm going to run really hard after what it is that he has called me to do. So Romans 12, page 1006, we're going to read verses 3 through 8. Let me say this too. Verses 1 and 2, really the beginning of verse 3 says this, for by the grace given to me. That for always says, okay, what came above, right? If it says for this, it means I need to look to see what came above. The great thing about it is Paul gives some hey, here's what you need to do to find out what God's mission is for you, right? And so all of us are what does God want me to do, right? And so Paul says, hey, here's some areas that you need to start looking at if you want to figure out what the will of God is what the Bible calls it. The Bible calls the will of God for your life, meaning the mission that he has for you specifically with the gifts that he's given you. So let me read. It says in verse 3, it says, for by the grace given to me, I tell everyone among you not to think more highly of himself, more highly than he should think. Instead, think sensibly, as God has distributed a measure of faith to each one. He says, now, as we may have many parts in one body, and all the parts do not have the same function, in the same way, we who are many are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. According to the grace given to us, we have different gifts. If prophecy, use it according to the proportion of one's faith. If service, use it in service. If teaching, in teaching. If exhorting, in exhortation. Giving, with generosity. Leading, with diligence. Showing mercy, with cheerfulness. Let me pray and then let's dive in. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that we can look at it 2,000 plus years later and see what it is that you have for our life. God, how you have designed us, how you have created us. God, I pray that it would come alive to us today, that we would see things differently so that we could do exactly what it is that you called us to do and not worry with the cares of the world and what they want us to do. God, that we can say yes to the things that you've gifted us in and no to the things that are probably outside of our gifting. Father, because ultimately what we are called to do is live a life pointing people to you and living a relationship with you. And so I just pray that that would come alive today through your message from Paul in the book of Romans. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so let me first start with something. I mean, he's talking ultimately is a church term that we hear called spiritual gifts, right? So these are spiritual gifts that Paul is talking about in verses 3 through 8. And the passage that we just read is very specific about spiritual gifts and what some of those are. He mentions that for those of us in the room today that have said yes to following Jesus, there are specific gifts that God gives us when we say yes to following him. And that means that we're gifted in certain areas that we would not be gifted in unless God had gifted it with us in the first place, right? And so if you're familiar with spiritual gifts, it's usually talked about in kind of the body of Christ and the church and using your spiritual gifts within the church in the way that it was designed to be used. That is true, but that's not my focus today. My focus, because I do think the church was God's creation to actually transform the world. I think the church was God's creation of people coming together to actually see life change happen in the world. And so we do have to use our gifts within the church to do that. But I'm going to tell you this, you'll never use your gifts inside the church unless God first changes inside of you. And so what I want us to think about today is not so much these gifts as in the body of Christ coming together and using them and functioning them as well together, but just what is it that God has wired me to do that He hasn't wired anybody else to do? How has He changed me so that I could use those gifts in my life and then, in turn, use them in the church the way He's called us to? I think we can change the world that way. I really do. Now, for those in the room that says, hey, I haven't said yes to Jesus yet, hey, you're not out of the woods either. God still gifts us with certain talents that we're born with, right? Some of you are very musically inclined and have been that way your whole life, right? God wired you musically. I know that because He didn't wire me musically. There are people that are very athletic, like way more athletic, right? I'm talking like, 6'6", laser rocket arm, Peyton Manning type, athletic. I mean, like, there is nobody that, God's given him that. I tried. Like, I wore number 18 and 16. I couldn't do it, right? He was gifted with what God had given him. And so we're not out of the woods if we haven't said yes to Jesus yet. It's still within us and in our DNA, certain wirings that we have. But regardless of a spiritual gift or a talent gifted by God, we were created and designed with a purpose in mind, no matter where we are on that spectrum. And in order to use it the most effectively and understand that we have true purpose, we have to know and understand that there is unity amongst diversity. You need to limit yourself to the areas you've been gifted or talented in, and then you will have a freedom to produce at a higher level in those gifts and talents. I promise you. And I believe that there are three ways that Paul kind of lays out here that we will see this unity come about and come to life in our lives. And the first one is this: discover. Learning is at the very core of discovery, and so we must first learn to do what Paul says and be honest with ourselves. Look at verse 3 with me. He says, For by the grace given to me. Now, Paul was sly, right? Like, he's setting you up by starting to talk about grace. It's like your friend that does like the positive sandwich, man. Hey, you look great, but, or like, man, you did a really good job here. I just want you to know that. But could you also work on doing this, right? It's like that positive sandwich is what Paul is doing. Hey, for the grace given to me, bro, you need to not think of himself more highly than he should. So he says, for by the grace given to me, I tell everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he should think. In fact, he goes on and says, instead, think sensibly. Some translations say with sober judgment. And if you can just use your brain to know that, like, when you're not sober, you don't have the best judgment, right? You can impair yourself and not make good decisions. That's why when you go to places like, casinos and other places, they love giving you things that would impair your judgment a little bit, and you can spend a little bit more money and do all of those types of things, right? They don't want you to have sober judgment, but Paul is saying, don't think of yourself more highly than you should, but have sensible judgment, sober judgment, because God's distributed a measure of faith to each one of us. In other words, hey, bro, don't tell yourself you are who you're not. Don't tell yourself that you are who you're not. Don't say yes to something that you know well and good that you could not or cannot do to the best of your ability. So this year I'm running a marathon, and I've never run a marathon, and I'm really nervous about it. I'm doing it at the end of the year because I say that I've never run a marathon. I have tried to train for a marathon one time. So if you ever get like physically and kind of mentally at a place where you're like, yeah, I'm good, man. I can do whatever anybody asks me to do, right? If you haven't, you'll get there at some point where that's actually not a good statement because you'll look and you'll be like, I should not have said yes to this. So somebody asked me to do a marathon. There was 3 months training, and I'm like, yeah, man, I could do a marathon 3 months. Why not? Like, how hard is this? Yeah, really hard, let me tell you, from personal experience. I got hurt during it, and I couldn't even finish the training. And so not only did I not do the marathon that I thought I could do, but I got hurt in doing it, and it took me a long time to recover from that because I didn't think with sound judgment. I wasn't thinking sensibly, right? And now I have a full year. So if I can't do it in a year, I just need to give it up. I don't need to do it, right? You can tell me that. If December comes, I haven't done the marathon, I'll be like, Chris, hang it up. It's not happening, man. And so hashtag failing in that moment because I wasn't thinking with sound judgment. I was thinking more highly about myself than I should. I had not discovered really who I was in that moment. That's what Paul's saying. Be honest with yourself. Discover who it is that you are. I mean, if I polled the room, I guarantee you we are all involved in areas of our life and things that we probably shouldn't be involved in right now. Maybe not that we're not good at it, but maybe that it's keeping us from doing what we're 100% a lot better at doing, right? And so we say yes to things at work. We say yes to our neighbors. We say yes to all of these other things to do for whatever reason. And we didn't really think with sound judgment because now we're operating outside the lane that God created us to operate in. And so very practically, here's what I want you to do this week. Find out what you're good at. Discover what it is that you're good at. One of the great ways that you can do this, be very careful, you can engage in a conversation with your spouse or with a friend or someone and ask them these 4 questions. Number 1, what am I bad at? Just ask them, what am I bad at? And just let me key you in here. If they say you're bad at something, that's something you definitely should say no to doing, right? If they're like, hey, bro, this is like not your lane, man. Don't do this. But you have to know what you're bad at in order to know what you're good at. And that's the next question. Ask them, what am I good at? What is it that like I'm good, right? Like you're like, oh, man, you're good at this. But then ask them something deeper. Say, what is it that I'm great at? What am I great at doing? And then even deeper, there's one more, and you need to say, hey, what is it that I'm uniquely gifted to do? And see, what we want to do is hang around those last 2 questions, right? We want to reject the first 2, reject the good so that you can move into the great, right? Because if you don't reject good things, if you don't reject bad things or good things, you're certainly not going to be able to do exactly what it is that you are great at doing and that what you are uniquely gifted to do. But if you don't go into a discovery process with this, you're just going to get caught in the lane of saying yes to whatever it is that you always have said yes to. So you have to discover and learn about yourself. Be honest with yourself. It's okay. The only person that we need to fear in saying yes or no to is God, ultimately. And you know what? He created us to do something specifically. And so that's the only thing we need to worry about having fear of saying no to. Because if he's called us to do something and we say no to it, that's a different conversation for another day. So unity begins with discovery. You've got to be honest with yourself and discover who it is you are. But then it moves into another stage. It moves into development. Look at what Paul says in verse 4. He says this. He says, now as we have many parts in one body, and all the parts do not have the same function, in the same way, we who are many are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. So that's a lot of parts and bodies, right? I mean, here's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying the church is like a body. That means it has arms and legs and feet and ears and eyes and all kinds of things. You get the picture. And what Paul is saying is that there are people that were created to be the left hand that need to be the left hand. And when they're the left hand trying to operate as the right foot, they don't need to do that because it makes the body function weirdly, right? I mean, imagine if my right foot was my ear. How weird would that be? Like imagine just leaning in for a whisper of that. Anybody that has a fear of feet in here, like you're kind of freaking out right now, right? I mean, like that would be strange if my foot was an ear and it's like, not going to work well. And so here's what Paul is saying. We are only going to be fully developed together as a body if we're operating in the lanes that God designed us to operate in. If we discover what it is we are, then we're going to develop and to run really hard after what it is that God called us to do. God created us. God created you a certain way. You're a foot, you're a hand, you're an eye. And the moment you step out of that is the moment that unity breaks down within your family, within your jobs, within the church, Let me paraphrase Paul here. There's unity in diversity. He's saying that the church forms and fully functions and develops when people use the gifts that God has given them to put into practice. You see, the church won't fully change the world until we're changed and doing what it is that God created us to do. When we each operate individually in our gifting, we're better together. Developing is always in response to discovery. So if you don't start with discovery, you're not going to develop. And so this week, after you make that list, after you say, what is it that I'm great at and uniquely gifted at? Then start to go, how can I get better in those things? How can I phase into where I'm saying no to the things that I'm bad and just good at, and yes to the things I'm great and uniquely gifted at, so that I can develop more of these? I think our problem is we always want to work on our weaknesses or strengthen our weaknesses, and then what happens is our strengths don't strengthen, right? And like you can manage your weaknesses, but I'm saying to strengthen your strengths because God gave you those for a reason. Guys, limit yourself over here so that you can experience full freedom in them. You're not going to do that if you're working on everything at the same time. There's nothing greater that I have been called to as a pastor than Ephesians 4 that says my job is to actually equip the saints for the work of ministry, which means that one of my jobs and one of the great joys I have is seeing and helping develop people into who it is God created them to be. So I guarantee you that you come and ask any of us on our team of, hey, how can I get better at this? We're going to have some coffees. We're going to have some meals. That will bring, you want to see me get excited? That's where you'll see me get excited, where I can help develop people into who it is that God called them to be. And so for this unity and diversity, we've got to discover what it is we're good at. We've got to then develop all of that as well, begin to develop that. But the last thing is we've got to deploy it. We've got to discover, develop, and deploy. You see, in the very nature, for anybody that's got a military background, the very nature of deployment means that we're sent out to do what we've been developed to do, right? And so we have to discover, and then our development is based on our discovery, and our deployment is based on our development. Look what Paul says in verse 6. He says, according to the grace given to us, we have different gifts. So if prophecy, be deployed for prophecy in proportion to one's faith, right? My words. If service, be deployed for service. In teaching, be deployed for teaching. In exhorting, be deployed for exhortation. In giving, be deployed with generosity. In leading, do that in deployment with your diligence in leading. And in showing mercy, be deployed with cheerfulness and showing mercy. If you weren't given the gift of teaching, you probably wouldn't be deployed in the gift of teaching, right? I'm never going to be an elementary school teacher. It's just not going to happen. My wife reminds me all the time that I don't have the patience to deal with it. I couldn't contend with a group of first graders. Stop operating outside of your gifting and start exercising more of what you're good at. Because when you say yes to everything that's outside of your gifts, and that's time spent away from your true gift. And one of the ways I'd love to show that is, I don't know if anybody knows, but I've actually done some drumming lessons. And so if I didn't have to teach, I would be up here every week, right? Because I'm just amazing at it. No, I'm terrible at it. As a matter of fact, as we were running through that this morning, somebody told me that was the best level of non-excellence that I've ever seen from a drum. It's the right level of terrible. If I got up here and did this every week, you would not be here. I'm just telling you. I mean, if I grabbed that guitar and started playing, or that's actually a bass. Tells you how gifted I am in that area. If I grabbed that electric guitar over there and started playing it and singing, you would not be here this morning. You see, followers of Jesus, we should concentrate and give energy to what God has gifted us in. You cannot be fully deployed outside of your gifts, guys, the ones you're developing. So our desire here is to help you develop and then deploy and use those gifts in your life, in your home, in your workplaces, and obviously in the church as well. So here's what I want you to do this week. 3 things. Discover your gifts. Then begin to develop them in some kind of way and then deploy them and put them into action. If you have no idea how to do any of that, we would love nothing more than to help you. In fact, if you go onto our app, there's a thing that says spiritual gifts. And if you want that, you can email us as well to info@JourneyPoint, or you can send it to chris@journeypoint.org. But if you go on our app, it says spiritual gifts. We will send you the gifts that you need to take so that you can identify who it is that you are, right? Whether it's Enneagram or spiritual gifts or the apostolic type of gifts that God gives, what they call APES, that's from Ephesians 4. There's all kinds of ways to discover what it is that you are uniquely gifted at doing. Because we'd find no greater joy than helping develop you in those areas. And by the way, if you're in the room and you're like, not for me, I've done that before. I've used all that. I've been there, kind of done that. That's just for the person that's struggling to find their mission and their purpose. Wrong. And it's people ranging from those that don't have a relationship with God to those that have a new relationship with Jesus to those that have had a relationship with Jesus for a really long time. Using and discovering and developing and deploying the gifts that God's given us is something that we will do until we've taken our last breath. Because they will come into effect in a different way at different times in our life. And check this out. Imagine what would happen if we used what God had given us in our lives to help others. Imagine if every single one of us here said, I'm going to take seriously the gifts that I've been given to help the lives of other people. Imagine the world that we would live in if we all took that seriously, right? Fox News or CNN would probably look a little bit different on a day-to-day basis if we took seriously what it was that God gifted us to do. Because there's unity in diversity, and we can help people in so much ways. We have everything we need sitting right here in the room. There's professionals, there's IT professionals, there's blue collar, there's white collar, there's moms, there's dads, there's grandparents. We have everything we need right here to develop in the areas that God's called us to do. He's never going to make us step out of anything that we don't have access to grow in. And remember this, if there's unity in diversity, then there's always disunity in uniformity. And so as you go out this week, remember that there's unity in diversity, but there's also disunity in uniformity. And so when we all try to be the same, when we all run after the same goal, when we all try to accomplish the same things, we are doing a disservice to everyone around us. When we live by saying yes to everything because it's just something to do or because we're afraid of conflict or acceptance or whatever it is, we're operating outside of the lane that God created us to live in. When you just seek to do what it is that your friend and everybody else wants you to do, you have to remember this. Your friend has not been gifted to do what God's called you to do. Your neighbor has not been gifted to do what God has called you to do. Your parents, your coworker, your siblings, your kids have not been gifted to do what God has called you to do. Because He uniquely created every single one of you in your mother's womb. And when we run towards saying yes to what everybody else is wanting us to do and what we think the world wants us to do, there is no way we can accomplish what it is God's called us to do. And what if we came together? What if we came together the way that we should? I was reminded this week of what would happen if we put aside our differences. For those that were stuck on an island or under a rock this week, a guy named Kobe Bryant passed away a week ago. And there were 9 people on a helicopter that crashed. Moms, dads, kids, pilots, professionals, all of them on this helicopter crashed. And as I was just I was inundated this week. I wore my Jordans today because I don't own a pair of Kobe's. And so this is the closest thing I could do, right? And so don't judge me. I just don't have Kobe's. I don't know if I'm not cool enough. But as I was watching this week, every single newscast you saw, every single there were people from all stages of life. Black, white, Hispanic, European, African. He was a huge soccer player and big in China and Japan and all these areas. They put aside every single difference they had to come together and celebrate the life of someone. And I was just reminded, what if we all put aside all of our differences and celebrated our differences and had unity in diversity amongst them to do exactly what it was that God has called us to do and accomplish? What if we did that? And it reminded me that this love for Kobe Bryant and Gigi and his daughter and the others that were on the airplane, this love transcended everything, right? I mean, like the love for them and their life and the way they lived their life and the tragedy that happened transcended any difference that anybody had. And that's exactly what a follower of Jesus has, because the love that they show and display is only first shown and displayed by the man and person and work of Jesus Christ.